There's a new study from MassINC calling for a different way to make the prison pipeline shorter while reducing crime. At issue is a change in strategy for offenders between the ages of 18 and 24. To tell us about the study is our guest from MassINC, the research director, Ben Forman. Thank you very much for being with us, Ben.
Oh, thank you very much, Chris. It's always a pleasure to come in and talk about what we've been working on.
And good to hear about your work as it's evolving here. This age group, 18 to 24, what's so important about this age?
Well, they stand out in part because they're such a large percentage of the population that we incarcerate every year. About 1 out of 5 new prison commitments is in this 18 to 24-year-old age range. They're also the most likely to come back to prison once we let them out. They have the highest rates of recidivism. And they're in this phase that criminologists call the criminological crossroads, where they make a decision about whether they're going to be a lifelong career criminal or whether they're going to desist and stop offending. And how we treat them in the correction system, it has a big bearing and influence on their trajectory.
Well, what's also critical here is the difference in the correctional system, because until you're 18 or so, you're a juvenile, and there's one way to deal with the juvenile. After that, it's different. Explain that difference.
Well, it's the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. If you commit a crime under age 18, you're treated in the juvenile court, which very much uses a developmental approach, recognizes that a big part of what you did probably had to do with your youthfulness. We know that adolescents don't always make good decisions. They can't control their impulses as well. If you do the same thing, but you're 18, you fall into the adult court, which is much more punitive, which has much less education, rehabilitation, treatment, and so forth. But the science is starting to tell us that those 18-year-olds look a lot like the juveniles in terms of their ability to make good decisions, and also in terms of their ability to change their behavior and really become a productive member of society if they have the right direction. So based on all that, it makes a lot of sense to look at this population and use some of the same practice that have been so effective for us with the juvenile population.
Now, what you said about this age group can be said for just about anybody in that same age, but the kids who are, or the young adults who are in trouble with the law at that age, what else is going on with them in terms of, mental health, poverty, education?
Well, in part, it's substance abuse problems. We know that substance abuse is a developmental disease that really takes hold at this age, where people don't have as much supervision from their parents. All of a sudden, they're out on their own in the world. And they also, again, don't always make the best decisions. So substance abuse can become an issue at this age. But it also can be violence. When you look at the people who cause the most trouble in our neighborhoods, it tends to be these young adults. And no one's really sure why they exhibit such high rates of violence at this age. In part, it may be that transition to adulthood, which is very stressful. And we need to recognize it's become more stressful for this generation. In the past, people got married much younger. They figured out their career at a much younger age. So the transition between when they were at home with their parents to when they were fully rooted in the world as an adult was shorter. And now it's a much longer period. It's much harder, especially for folks that aren't succeeding, and they're more apt to make bad decisions that kind of perpetuate into a downward spiral.
I sense here that with people getting into the prison phase is that it comes to define their sense of relationships with people. So how do you reorient them?
Well, you really have to have a rehabilitative mindset and approach and value that young person and their potential. And you don't want to reinforce in their identity that they're a criminal, which too often our system does. And that's the exact approach we've taken in juvenile justice. In juvenile incarceration, as we've known it, has basically ended. There really are no jails for juveniles anymore. They look more like therapy and treatment homes. And juvenile incarceration rates and crime rates have fallen up the map as a result of that. When you look at offending patterns for this age group, they haven't fallen by anywhere near as much. And I think our theory is that if we use those same practices, we could dramatically drive down crime in this age group, and then we won't form as many of those career criminals. And if you look at European models of dealing with this age group. They look exactly like what they do with juveniles, and they have much lower rates of crime.
Well, closer to home, we have what's being done by the nonprofit based in Chelsea, ROCA, and that's, for me, that's a new definition of rehabilitation. Explain how that works. This is not like going to a class once a week while you're still in prison.
Yeah. The best work that we're doing in Massachusetts is being done by groups like ROCA, and there's others, UTech up in Lowell. There's the Safe and Successful Youth Initiative, which operates in Boston and around the state. And that's all based on a public health model of taking people that have been involved in violent crimes or been victims of violent crimes that we recognize are real threats, and providing them the set of services they need to be successful. And there's been a lot of rigorous research looking at those models, and it has shown that they've driven down crime dramatically and been really effective. But that's outside of the correction system. That's what we do with youth once they've served their sentences and they're coming back to the community. In some cases it may be as an alternative, but we haven't built the courts around that sort of therapeutic approach to the extent we could or probably should.
What do you need? Sort of an intermediary court level or something like that?
Yeah, we need judges that are trained on development, and we need alternative sanctions. And when we do need to place youth in facilities, we need those facilities to be the right environments with the appropriate set of services available to the kids. I think it's a number of things, but none of it is, outside of our ability to put it together, and I think we'd save a lot of money and prevent a lot of crime in the long run if we did.
Now, there have also been some attempts at new strategies in Connecticut. Anything you can tell us about that? Yeah,
and that's all very recent, but the governor of Connecticut has been an exceptional leader on this issue. He went to Germany last summer and saw how they serve their young adult population, how it's very different. He came back and announced that he was going to press to extend the juvenile court's jurisdiction in Connecticut to age 21, and that inmates age 21 to 25 would be placed in facilities designed to provide services to youth, much like they do in Germany. So I think he recognizes that there's a sweet spot here, that this group, if you serve this group well, you really push recidivism down, you stop criminal careers from extending. What we do know is that if you keep offending after age 25, you're likely to do it until you're age 40 or so, and the cost you could rack up are in the millions of dollars. It's just one single serial offender. So there's a lot of savings to be had. There's a lot of crime to be prevented with this thoughtful approach and strategy.
You mentioned the savings, but effective rehabilitation, that also means a shift of cost, because you've got some health services. You've got to have people like a ROCA who call you in the morning trying to make sure you get out of bed. It's labor intensive.
Yeah, no, it is. It definitely is. Most of the cost-benefit analysis that has been done on these types of services show that they produce very large savings to the public. So I think they're worthwhile investments. But again, it is a reallocation of resources, like you say.
What about the laws that govern sentencing themselves? Is there a need for some more changes to make this kind of approach work?
I think there is. I mean, you need to look at the laws that governing sentences in particular, because sometimes we have very long sentences that really, if they're mandatory minimums especially, they take out sort of this youth's potential to develop at a really critical stage. I mean, if they're not involved in education at this age, and they don't have that potential until they're in their 30s, they may have lost that altogether. And then the other piece is the criminal records in particular. Again, if you can't participate in the workforce because you have a criminal record that's not sealed for 10 years, you're not going to get that work experience that you need, and it's going to have very long-lasting repercussions for you, and that creates fiscal costs to the state.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you again for having me.
From MassINC, Ben Forman.